My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library. Today is April the 13th, 2017, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today I'm talking to Mr. Wayne Barber. Mr. Barber, where and when were you born?
I was born May 9th, 1945 in Danville, Kentucky.
Okay, so you're from Kentucky.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any siblings or any family that were in the military?
Yes, my dad and a number of my uncles were all involved in World War II in one way or another. Most of them in the Army, one in the Army Air Corps.
Okay, which is the Air Force now.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think did that play a big part in the way you thought about the military before you served, or?
Yeah, because it was expected. You were expected to go in the military. I forgot to mention a minute ago, my younger brother also did a hitch in the Air Force.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was kind of the part of the culture then is if you were of that age, you were supposed to do the military thing.
Yeah. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Actually, when I got out of high school, I went to barber school.
Okay.
Learned to cut hair, and was working. Actually, I was working in Danville when I got word that I was going to be drafted. So, rather than wait to be drafted into the Army, I joined the Naval Reserve at that point.
Okay. So you did serve in the Navy. So that's the next question. So you enlisted, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Was there
just ahead of being drafted?
Okay, just you were drafted.
Let's be clear on that.
Okay. Was there a reason why you picked the Navy over other branches?
Well, partly, but I guess part of the reason was because my dad had been in the Navy, and I had heard all his sea tales and stuff like that, and I just thought it had a little more appeal to me. And besides that, I had a chance by joining the Navy. I had a chance to pick my area of what I wanted to study in the Navy. So,
do you remember your mom and dad's reaction when you joined the Navy?
Not particularly. It was like I said, I found out in, I don't know, July or something that I was going to get the next month. I was going to get a greetings from Uncle Sam letter, so I decided to beat it to the punch. But I don't know, I don't remember any particular reaction on their part. It was kind of what, like I said before, it's kind of what was expected from you.
Okay. Do you remember, I always like to ask this question, do you remember being sworn in? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was done at the Reserve Training Center there in Danville. That's where I was actually sworn into the service. And I ended up going to reserve meetings for several months before I actually went to basic training.
Okay. Do you remember leaving the basic training? Did you fly there, or did you bus?
No, I made a trip on the train up to Chicago and back.
Okay.
So, and the first time I'd ever traveled on a train.
Okay.
So,
that's the thing about it is, and I've interviewed my father and other people, that they live in small communities, and the first time they fly an airplane or they ride a bus or like a train is when they go off to the military, and that just really, was it exciting or was it nervous or?
No, there were a group of us all from this same reserve center that all went to basic training at the same time. There was about 8 of us, I think. And we all traveled together. It was kind of like our own group. So, I guess we probably were a little bit nervous, but we wouldn't have let anybody else know.
No.
And also, getting back to what you said, the first time I flew was when I went to Bainbridge, Maryland, to go to school.
Okay.
So that would have been my first experience with being in an airplane.
Okay. And so you went to Great Lakes, Michigan for your training.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? When you first got there, what was your impression?
Well, I don't know. I guess I thought I'd do a little something about it because of having heard my dad talk about his experiences and stuff. But it was just hectic, and they were rushing you to do everything and this kind of stuff. And I think all of us were pretty much in the same boat. We were all probably apprehensive and wanting to try to do what we were supposed to do. And sometimes that was a little hard to figure out what that was.
Yeah. Do you remember, everybody that I've talked to remember about how your instructors were very matter of fact and let you know things real quick?
Yeah, to say the least, they were, because you're, like I said, you were always, the pace was pretty frenzied, and you had to be in a hurry to get here or there or the other place. You didn't get a lot of personal time.
Do any instructors stand out to you the most, or you remember anyone?
No, not really. Where I guess where that came into play more was when during the time I was in radio school, which was a 5-month thing. You had more time to learn the people that were instructing you and that kind of stuff. And I remember a couple of the instructors I had there, but in basic training, no, it was just let's hurry up and get this thing over with and go back home.
Yeah. And so what month did you get to basic training?
I went to basic training in October.
Okay.
And it was just starting to get cold up there. Well, like you said, your dad was in January, and I can't imagine what it might have been like to have been there then.
So was it over before we got like Christmas time or Thanksgiving time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, this was an abbreviated, since I was in the reverse, this was an abbreviated basic. It wasn't as long as what the regular Navy were going through.
Okay. Did you remember writing back and forth to your parents, or you remember that?
Not during that time, because I don't know. I might have written a letter, possibly, but there wasn't enough time for that really to go on too much, because basically I didn't leave the base during the time I was in basic.
Yeah. So what was your, as they say, your MOS, your military occupation?
I was a radio man.
Okay.
And which, like I said before, that was what I wanted. That was one of the things that appealed to the Navy, is because I was able to pick that. And
a technical trade?
Yeah, and the reason I was interested in that to begin with, there was a friend of mine, or actually he was the father of one of the girls I went to high school with, who was a ham radio operator. And I was really fascinated by what he did with ham radio. And matter of fact, he was in the reserve unit that I ended up joining.
Okay.
And I guess kind of was a little bit instrumental in my deciding to do
Okay.
that, because he told me, said, if you want to learn radio, you can do it at the Navy's expense, which I did.
Yeah. So can you tell us where you went and maybe some of your training, your classes you took, and how that worked out?
Well, I would like to say before, I went up to Bainbridge, Maryland, which is in the northeast corner of Maryland, up near the Pennsylvania border. It's on the Chesapeake Bay. Went up there for 5 months, and basically you spend a whole lot of time learning how to copy Morse code and how to operate some of the basic equipment that was used on board ship. Not most of it was pretty outdated and not the kind of stuff that we ended up having to use when I got on there. But we spent, like I said, about half the time I spent there during the 20 weeks was training to use Morse code,
Okay.
learn how to read, how to send or receive Morse code, and then, as it turned out, I never made any use of that at all once I got in the fleet.
Can you tell us, explain to us what Morse code is for people watching this?
Well, the SOS the series of dits and dots that
Okay.
that are for the alphabet, and then there are certain op signs, they call them, and shortcuts on how to do things with code. And like I said, they put a lot of emphasis on it, and in a lot of cases guys made use of it. But in the case of the ship I went on, was primarily pretty up to date. Well, it was pretty much state of the art as far as communication was concerned. So we didn't make any, well, I never made any use of Morse code on board ship at all.
Okay. So once you graduate basic training, I always like to ask so people can understand, what will be your general day or just an everyday day from waking up to going to, like after you graduated basic training, you were kind of in your routine, what would be like a basic, and what was the name of the ship that you were on?
I was on the USS Taconic.
Taconic.
Yes, there were only 5 of them in the fleet, and they have since been, that type ship has been phased out. They were all named after, the Taconic is the name of a mountain range, and all the ships, there were 5 of them in the whole Navy, and they were all named after mountains.
Okay.
But the onboard routine was, is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir.
Well, to basically reveille and go get some chow, and then go to muster, and then depending on whether you were on duty, because we weren't on duty we had varying shifts of work in the radio shack, depending on whether we were in port or at sea. But then if you weren't on duty in the radio shack, we went to muster, and then whatever the chief had for us to do that day, we were assigned to go work on it. If you were on duty, you were in the radio shack doing your radio duties. But there was like I said, usually when we were at sea, we were on what we call port and starboard. You were either on duty, or basically you were either working in the radio shack, or you were off duty and free to sleep and read and get your meals and whatever else needed to be taken care of.
What time of day did you usually wake up? You remember?
I'm thinking it's probably about 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
I wouldn't want to take an oath on that, but
Okay.
I think it was probably about 6 o'clock in the morning.
And when you talk about muster, can you explain to the people that watch us what muster meant?
Well, basically everybody in our division had to report to a spot on deck to just be accounted for. And sometimes, depending on the weather, if the weather weren't too bad, we would do it on deck. And in case the seas were too rough or whatever, sometimes the muster would be held in the radio shack or some other place. But as a rule, it was on deck.
Okay. So it's kind of like a roll call.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly what it was.
Where did you can you tell some of the places that your ship that you all went?
Oh yeah. Well, what we did a lot of our operations involved going to down. There was an island down off the coast or off the coast of Puerto Rico called Vieques, and we were part of the amphibious navy, which meant that we ended up landing troops. And generally, we would pick up if we were going to operate down there, we would generally pick up troops down to Morehead City, North Carolina. There would be 300 to 500 Marines come aboard, and we would take them down there, and they would do mock landings and that kind of stuff. That was what we did a number of times, and in the course of all that, went to Bermuda, Panama, of course to San Juan, Puerto Rico several times, also to the Virgin Islands. Went to Bermuda once, also made one trip over to St. Thomas, and we made one trip to the Mediterranean, and that was the year I got out.
Okay.
We went over there for 2 months. Went to actually we were supposed to go to Germany, and they had a lot of student unrest there, so instead of sending us into that, we ended up going to Lisbon, Portugal, which was one of the neatest ports I was ever in, and partly because the Navy had never been there, and or not there very much. And then we went to Spain, and we also ended up going to Athens.
Okay. I know I've talked to my father. Have you ever been on like a really bad storm, like a hurricane? You remember that? Or?
Well, yeah. Actually, the trip, probably the roughest seas I was ever in was on the Mediterranean trip I was talking about. This was in like April, I think, probably. And we got up into the North Sea, where we're getting ready to go into the North Sea. We're in the North Atlantic, and it was ferociously rough. That was the only time I was ever really seasick.
Yeah.
Because we had to tie everything down on board the ship. Everything was flying here, there, and everywhere, and a lot of guys were just like I was, either sick or pretty close to it. So
Could you explain to people that's never been, I mean, that's something that most people don't understand, how you're out in the middle of the ocean and the waves, how tall are the waves?
well, I don't know. At one point, they didn't want us going on deck because the waves were so high. Actually, I don't know the answer, but I know they were coming. Some of the guys that were up on the where they were steered the ship, there was water coming over where they were.
So maybe 100-foot tall?
Well, maybe, I don't know. Our ship was fairly tall. It had a pretty large superstructure on it, and it was pretty tall. But like I said, we were not supposed to go on deck.
Okay.
So and nobody wanted to anyway.
No, yeah. So were you on was it a destroyer or aircraft carrier?
No, it was actually basically what served as a communication ship.
Okay.
We were on those operations. We generally carried an admiral staff, and they were the ones that were coordinate. That was called senior officer SOPA, senior officer president of fleet, and all the communications. And that's why we had real modern communications gears, because we were the communication center for the operation generally.
Okay.
So we didn't, like I said, there were only 5 of them in the entire Navy. So the ship was, like you mentioned, a destroyer. The ship was a little bit bigger than most of the destroyers that I saw while I was in.
Did you have other ships following you that maybe can back you up if they needed?
Yeah. You were generally most of the time you were traveling in some kind of a convoy type situation. Now, in the case of when we made the med crossing, that was a solo crossing. We didn't. There weren't any other ships with us. One of the kind of interesting things that happened not interesting might not be the right choice of words, but during the crossing back, when we came back, which would have been in May, there was a ship. A submarine that was lost. It was on the track. It was behind us, called the Scorpion.
Okay.
And they never found it. As a matter of fact, at one point it was considered that we would be sent back to help in the search for the ship, but it didn't turn out to happen. We came on back to the States.
Okay. So what was it like? You're a Kentucky boy and you're out in the middle of the ocean. Did that blow your mind or?
Well, yeah, a little bit, I guess. I think I had a little bit of an idea about what to expect hearing my dad talk about it and that kind of thing. But, well, one of the things that I always remember, I've always thought I would like to take a cruise, but I've never been aboard a ship since I got out of the Navy. But one of the things that I remember that was especially cool, especially like when you were out there operating by yourself, was to be up on deck when the moon came up at night. It was awesome. You know, it was right on the horizon, and it just looked like, and you didn't have any idea how far you were looking.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. That was one thing in particular I remember.
What did you do on your on your off time? Do you remember?
I played cards. I read a lot. Read a lot before I was in service, and read a lot
during the now, don't you?
Yes, and I still do. So that took up a lot of my time. I was kind of the traveling library. I was the only guy in the department that would spend any money on books. So I ended up providing books for other guys to read a lot of the time.
Okay.
But and they showed. When the weather was good, we had movies were shown on deck. So go to the movies at night, or we called them flicks at the time.
Yeah.
And and a lot of just carrying on, just stuff, hanging out, as the kids would say now.
Yeah. So did everybody get along pretty well, or?
Yeah, for the most part. You kind of had to, because you were
nowhere to go.
That's right. You were kind of confined to each other's company. So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember your sleeping quarters? Were they bunk beds?
No, they were hanging racks. There was a post in the middle, and these racks swung down. They were like 4 deep, and there was an advantage to being on top, except for having to climb up there, because you didn't have anybody above you that you were going to hit them with your elbow or something if you turned off too quickly, because the space was at a premium, and they were spaced pretty closely together.
Yeah. So, do you remember your meals? Do you remember those?
Yeah, I do. And you know, you hear people all the time trashing military food, but in general, it was okay. One of the things I particularly remember about meals was what the watch, when you went on watch at night, what they call mid-watch, which started at midnight. They provided food for you to have to eat to go on before you went on watch, and it was usually soup and some fruit and that kind of stuff. It was kind of basic stuff, but sometimes you felt like it was pretty important because you were hungry and you didn't want to be on watch for 7 hours or however long it was. But I thought the food in general was pretty good. Now, one of the things that was kind of that we all hated was when we went on a deployment so long, you could only take on board so much fresh milk. And we would eventually you'd run out of fresh milk, and then it was powdered milk, and you could tell the difference, and nobody liked it.
I remember my father talking about how cheap cigarettes were like 15 cents a pack.
I wasn't a smoker, but I had a good friend from up in New York who, he didn't smoke either, but he had a little racket going.
You kind of trade things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the case of when we were in port, as long as we were inside the 3-mile limit, cigarettes were 20 cents a pack. But when we went on a deployment, you got a ration card for what it basically allowed you to do was buy about 1 carton of cigarettes per week for the length of time you were going to be going. And when you bought those, they called them C-stores. And when you bought them, they were $1.10 a carton. So we would all buy our ration up. Like I said, I didn't smoke. We would all buy our ration up and cigarettes and give them to him. And he lived in New York, and I think they were already charging about 45 or 50 cents a pack for cigarettes in New York. So he would take them to New York. He had a bunch of brothers that smoked. Of course, if he'd been caught, he'd been in trouble because you weren't allowed to take about 2 unopened packs of cigarettes off the ship at a time. And he never got caught, but he paid for his gas money by taking cigarettes to New York and selling them to his friends and brothers.
I think we've talked when you said you were a petty officer second class.
Yes, I was by the time I got out.
Okay, can you explain to people maybe what that is, and without talking to other people? So I know maybe if you've never been around the military or don't understand the military, so if you go by a captain or a lieutenant, you don't just walk by, do you?
No.
Can you explain to them how that works?
Well, of course, after a period of time, you kind of learn what the pecking order is and where you rank in it. And generally, during the time I was in, I was pretty low. You started out as a seaman apprentice, and then after a period of time, if you passed the test, you could become a seaman. Seaman first is what my dad always referred to it as, and then you were taking tests, and the tests you took as a petty officer were related to your specific field. So you became. The next step was to become a 3rd class petty officer, and then 2nd class was above that, and then from that to 1st class, and then chief was chief petty officer, and there were 3 ranks of chief. You had senior chief, and then master chief. So and that was as high as you could go in the enlisted.
Enlisted, okay. Yeah. So when you had met somebody that was maybe like a lieutenant or a captain, you definitely you saluted them.
Yeah, outside. Now on board the ship, you didn't do that. I mean, I'm talking about inside the spaces, but you did salute, especially out on deck. The salute, that kind of stuff was kind of relaxed a little bit when you were inside. For one thing, and your dad probably told you this, is you weren't ever supposed to salute uncovered, which meant if you didn't have your hat on, you didn't salute.
Yeah.
But yes, you were. Like I said, that was more strictly enforced on bases and, and more formal.
Yeah. Even like when some officer went behind a car, and if you saw his car and you were supposed to.
Actually, I don't know if I remember. I'm sure you thought you should.
Yeah, I heard stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what year did you get out of the Navy?
1968.
Did you? So this is probably pretty hot of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, it was. There was still a lot to go of the Vietnam War, but at that point, there were some raiding fields where if you were real crucial, that sometimes you could be held over. You know, if you were in a really hard to replace field, sometimes you might get extended. But I didn't. I got out when I was supposed to. And of course,
did you ever? I know maybe did you ever watch the news, or did that even that all the things going on in the world, or did you not pay attention to that?
Well, yeah, you did a certain amount. Of course, we had televisions on the ship, so that you could watch. You know, if we were in port where you could pick a television station up. I usually got a hold of a newspaper if we were in port most of the time and read. So I was aware of a lot of the kind of stuff that was going on. I don't guess I was aware that some of it was as sensational as it became later on.
Okay.
With all the protesting and other things that were going on.
Yeah. When you finally got out of the Navy, were you happy, excited, or did you have a family then?
No, I wasn't. No, I was still single. Came back from back home temporarily and ended up taking a job up in Ohio. The idea was at some point that I was going to go back to college, and so I ended up taking a job with General Electric up in Ohio.
Okay. For
about a year and a half.
How did you feel about being a civilian again? Did that bother you, or?
Well, actually, I wasn't exactly a civilian again because I was still in the reserve.
Oh, that's right.
And
you were.
So I was still in the Navy,
okay.
Although I wasn't on active duty in the Navy.
Okay.
But I still had to go to meetings once a month.
Okay.
There was a reserve center there in Cincinnati that I went to, and I continued going to reserve meetings for another 2 years until I fulfilled the 6-year total obligation. Because, matter of fact, even during the time I went back to college at Berea, I was traveling back and forth to Ohio 1 week a month to go to meetings.
Yeah. Did you miss the discipline and the structure, or you?
No, not particularly. I mean, of course, we still had the discipline and the structure when we went to the meeting. So, I mean, I still had my uniform, and I guess I sort of thought of myself as a military person, but it wasn't like living it day in, day out like you did on board ship.
Yeah, and I've talked to everybody I've mentioned this to. Every interview I've done, everybody's at least 15 minutes early. Everybody's early. And so I can't help but think that's their training and being early on things and not.
Yeah, but we had a few stragglers.
Yeah, well, you always, you had your stranglers, but.
It definitely did because, like, I did learn. Of course, I had pretty good discipline during the course of growing up, so it was like I'd already learned that, but I guess it got reinforced during the time I was in the Navy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I guess you always had your stragglers and people that
exactly
and everything, but for the most part.
You pretty much were expected to be on time.
Yeah. Do you? So when you went to Ohio.
Yeah.
And so. Do you remember what did you do the rest of your time until maybe like the last maybe 5-10 years of your when you went on to your civilian life?
I don't know if I understand.
I guess when you say like 1990, 2000.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean what I did?
Yes.
Well, of course, like I said, I worked for General for about a year and a half, and ended up going back to college over at Berea.
Okay.
And then got out of that, but basically graduated from college and took a job with a small newspaper chain for a short period of time. But then I ended up going to work in the hardware business
Okay.
in 1974, I guess
Okay.
that was.
Okay.
And that's what I stayed in that industry until I retired.
All right. Okay. Do you think that anything you learned or the things you learned to do in the military helped you with your jobs or?
Well, no, that was kind of one of the things I had in mind when I trained in radio, was thinking maybe that I might be able to turn that into something once I got out, but there wasn't, basically based on what I'd learned in there wasn't a lot that I could do with that, so that's why I decided to go back to college. And mentioned in college, that was one of the things that was great about having been in there, because my education was pretty much paid for by the GI Bill.
Okay, yeah. So that was something that.
Oh yeah, that was,
helped a lot.
and probably might have. Well, I don't know whether I was going to college on my own or not, but it made it a heck of a lot easier to be getting that check every month during the time while I was going to school.
So what year was this when you went back to college?
Well, I actually started back to college in winter of 1970.
Okay.
Started in the middle of the year and ended up graduating in 3.5 years. Went to a couple summer schools, so
Okay.
I ended up graduating in 1973.
Okay. So you have your bachelor's, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like the GI Bill helped you out.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, because basically it was relatively inexpensive to go to school at Berea, and I happened to got a little bit lucky because President Johnson pushed for some extra benefits for the military at that point, and we got an increase on the amount we got paid it became retroactive to the time I started school. So
Yeah.
and it pretty much basically paid for my education.
Yeah. One thing I like to ask everybody is, from your time in the military and seeing things in the military, how do you feel about the military and war in general today? Your present day, how do you feel about it, or does that make sense? That you understand?
Well, no,
I guess I mean, when you see conflict or war in the world today, how do you feel about it? Does your military service, does it affect the way you feel about it, or?
Well, I don't know. Well, war's just a terrible thing, no matter what the context of it is. And I wish there were some other way that people could figure out to resolve their differences other than having to take up arms. But that seems like the world we live in. And now with all the terrorism and stuff that's going on, it's even a little bit more. One of the things that I'm probably in the minority in this, but I'm not so sure that we wouldn't be better if we still had the draft.
Okay.
And I know that's probably not what a lot of other people think, but I think there's probably, because basically now the military is kind of the last resort for a lot of people, I think.
Some people think it maybe it's the bottom of the rung. Well,
Exactly.
I can't go to college. I can't go to,
Exactly.
well, I might as well just go to the military.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the attitude. I think there should be some kind of, if you're a conscientious objector, there still should be some way there could be some national service.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe tell me if I'm wrong or not. Your way of thinking, if we still had a draft or everybody was in the military, maybe they would feel more part of the country or be more patriotic, or?
Yeah, I think so, because basically, unless you know somebody, the wars that we've had during the time since Vietnam, it's been like we're kind of detached from them, because it's like you mentioned, television. What you see on television is reality, unless you know somebody who's been there or a family member or something like that. It's like it's something that's happening on television and not not real.
You know, if you're not careful, you see the television, you say, well, that's just a movie, or that's not real.
Exactly.
Yeah. So so you think if you don't, someone who builds a house is more proud of it than they built it themselves. It has some ability.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So
And that's why I think national
ownership,
service,
maybe ownership, would that be a good idea?
yeah, it probably would, because to my way of thinking now, it's words kind of abstract in some ways, because especially now with the video games and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if you tell reality from fantasy that well.
Yeah, because you play video games. Well, I was in war and I shot so and so.
Yeah.
No, you weren't.
No, that's right, exactly.
So yeah, I definitely think you have a point that would maybe, if you're not a part of something or you understand it, then maybe sometimes you're disconnected.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I know everybody that I've interviewed have strong feelings about the flag. I think that comes from
absolutely.
Have ownership, and you see the flag is it's not just like any other flag.
Well, one of the things that I know you're a baseball fan, that was pretty neat that happened last summer was they had that Armed Forces baseball game over at the military base in South Carolina, and to me that was a great thing to do.
Yeah. We need to take care of the people that take care of us.
Absolutely.
In closing, there's always the question I ask, and this is the part where you can have the floor. If there's anything that you'd like to say, or it's on your mind, or what anybody that's going to watch this interview, will it be in 5 months or a year or 20 years from now, what would you have them to think about your service, or for them to get out of this interview?
I don't know anything in particular other than I'm proud to have served my country, even though it didn't involve a lot of personal sacrifice for me, but I appreciate all the people who paid the ultimate price for their service.
Yeah. And so I just want to appreciate especially your service and your time, and I've enjoyed this interview, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
That's